If you want to find that kid audience, the kid audience are on YouTube. They are not on broadcast television. And it seems that they're less frequently on streamers as well. I know that I've, for many years, lived in this world where it's like, well, we need ROI within 6 months, 12 months. And generally, kids' brands, including Bluey, do take a while to build momentum and get that big success. It was a very fast turnaround show where we finished episodes very close to release. We're finishing episodes on Wednesday, which would then get released on Friday. Because the turnaround was very quick and on YouTube, you can get audience feedback immediately. It was useful to have because then that way we could incorporate audience feedback into the next batch of episodes quite easily, which meant that the show evolved very quickly.
Welcome to We Interrupt This Broadcast. I'm your host, Avon Yap. I'm joined by David Hutchinson, who is a UK-based writer, director, and showrunner. He created the breakout animated hit series Boy and Dragon, which has over 6 billion views with a capital B and 7 million subscribers. We'll be talking about his creative and commercial process making Boy and Dragon and the frontiers of the kids animation business online. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
For those who may not know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
I am from a small city in England called Sunderland. I studied animation. I was a freelance animator. Then I moved into production, show creation, writing, directing, and I created a show called Boy and Dragon. It is a YouTube-first show. YouTube is its main distribution platform. It is a cute little show, 2-minute to 4-minute episodes about a little boy who's a knight, and he's like smart, brave. He's also a kind of average 10-year-old kid, lazy, likes candy, can be a bit selfish sometimes. And his pet dragon, who is basically a slobbering idiot puppy in the body of this giant, magnificent dragon who can breathe fire and fly, but is ultimately very incompetent and needs boy's help with everything.
And can you set the scene for where the world was and where you were as a creative when you started Boy and Dragon?
So it was 2018 when I came up with the idea. And the idea was to get a show made, which is kind of the idea everyone has, not an easy task. So there was a small amount of money available, not the budget of a full series production. I would say it was the 2019 equivalent of a development budget, just to do development stage of a project. And I pitched something experimental for YouTube with a small cast, language agnostic to save money on voiceover, set in a white void space to save money on backgrounds. And I was fairly confident with perimeters like these, I'd still have the opportunity to do the kind of weird yet cute comedy that I like. Because it was so low budget, the show didn't really have production executives. It didn't really have a writing team. It was kind of its own little island of creative experimentation, separated from the wider corporate environment. This was at WildBrain, which is a big company that produces a lot of kids. This was in the digital studio in the London office, which was sort of nestled away far from the animation studio in Vancouver.
I see. And tell me about where your personal inspirations for the show came from.
Well, I studied animation. I've been really into animation since I was very young. I'm a typical millennial in that, a typical late millennial in that I love classic Simpsons. I was really into all the Nick shows, all the Cartoon Network shows. So I've always loved it, always drew, always wrote. And I basically wanted to do a show about a relationship, and it's a relationship that's positive and sweet, but also like a real relationship that a pet owner has with their pet, which is that sometimes the pet just really annoys them. Sometimes the pet's a real burden. And I thought there would be a lot of comedy we could get from that.
As an owner of a 3-year-old Australian cattle dog mix, I totally understand the feeling.
I have a pet bunny who is not kind of the opposite of a dragon visually, but can definitely behave like one.
Well, what really stands out about watching Boy and Dragon is that it's so clear to me as a viewer that you and the team simply loved making the show. And at the same time, there was like such a real sense of playful experimentation. Can you tell us where that comes from?
Yeah, so I think that just comes from me. Like I'm a playful person who loves to experiment. But I think it also came from the way we produced it, which was it was a very fast turnaround show where we finished episodes very close to release. We're finishing episodes on Wednesday, which would then get released on Friday. So because the turnaround was very quick and on YouTube we can get audience feedback immediately, it was useful to have because then that way we could incorporate audience feedback into the next batch of episodes quite easily, which meant that the show evolved very quickly. I think on I'm going to use regular television as an example. You'd make a season of content up front. So a full season, 26 episodes, how much? And then that's locked. You have no choice but to put it out, see how people respond to that season. And then if you're lucky and get a season 2, you can then respond to the audience in season 2. Whereas if this, I was able to respond to the audience every few episodes.
I don't know if you know John M. Chu, the director of Wicked, but he wrote this fabulous autobiography where he talks about this cinematic experience where you go into a cinema and whether you like it or not as a viewer, you have to just trust what the artist has given you. Whereas I feel with what you've described with Boy and Dragon, it's almost the opposite, where you kind of almost collaborate and respond to what the audience tells you through the feedback that you're receiving.
That's an interesting area of discussion. I myself prefer it when I'm getting an artist's vision as unfiltered as possible. I am aware that in the world of animation can get expensive so quickly, and we want to keep this team of animators and producers hired for as long as possible. So we want it's in our best interest for the show to be a commercial success. And audience feedback it's totally fine to follow audience feedback. Everyone does it as long as you stay true to your own values and you do it in your own way. Then I don't see an issue with that.
And I think that's one of the strengths of Boy and Dragon, actually. It feels very flexible. It jumps genres, trends, and ideas. Was that quite intentional from the start?
It was intentional from the start, creatively, because I like to have that flexibility. I also feel like animation is currently going through a phase where it's very, very concerned with the story Bible. It's very, very concerned with getting that story Bible locked during development and then giving briefs to writers and saying, no, follow the story Bible precisely. Whereas I feel that cuts off room for improvisation, for experimenting, and for finding what really works about your show and what the audience really likes about your show.
Can you give an example of one of those aha moments or discoveries that you made while you were doing Boy and Dragon?
When the show first started, it's always had a really small cast for budgetary reasons. But when the show first started, it was Boy, Dragon, and an old wizard type who was their antagonist, and he was a teacher. That was his character, really. He was meant to represent like the grumpy voice of authority. And that worked fine, but the wizard clearly wasn't the most popular character. And I don't mean popular in that people love to hit him. I mean popular as in people weren't that interested in him.
What do you mean by that?
He didn't perform that very well in thumbnails. Episodes featuring him as like a centralized force never made that big of an impression.
That sounds brutal as a creative to kind of receive that feedback.
He was never the main character, so I didn't feel like it was that bad. But I suppose other characters, we had another duo called Girl and Unicorn. Audiences responded very positively to them. The Unicorn was a one-off character, never designed to be seen again, just a one-off joke for an episode. She was extremely popular. She's not your typical unicorn. She's not your grandma's unicorn in that she's very cute. Using the analogy of dragons like a big slobbering puppy inside the body of a dragon, unicorn's like a really violent Doberman inside the body of an adorable unicorn. And yeah, people loved her. So we brought her back, and then we brought back some more, fleshed out her character. And in some respects, as I say this is not something that is new. This is not something that is new. Like, if you look back at the history of television, plenty of sitcoms brought in the characters a one-off, and then the audience liked them, so they kept coming back. Christopher Lloyd in Taxi comes to mind as Reverend Jim. That's a reference that will age me. I'm not as old as that reference makes me seem like I'm in my 50s. I'm not. I'm just a broadcast history nerd. So it's definitely nothing new. And I think a lot of working for YouTube is not necessarily anything new. It's just about a slight shift in mindset. what I realized was this should be more a show about kids hanging out than a show
Whoa.
about kids versus adults. So that's a pretty good case study of evolution. We sort of
Wow.
pivoted more
I'm
to that
getting
area.
goosebumps hearing that creative discovery. I mean, how did you come to that conclusion that that was the pivot that you sort of needed to do with the show?
Well, this is the great thing about the YouTube analytics. You get data back. It's like a big always switched on focus group. You get data back and provided you decipher it correctly, you can find those insights like that.
This is something I often feel conflicted as a creator. Did you face similar inner conflicts of needing to follow trends whilst also protecting your creative voice?
Yes and no. So I think blindly following trends creates the worst kind of content. With Boy and Dragon, it was kind of set up so that we could satirize trends or parody them or twist them and turn them into something that works for our show.
That's so smart.
So I always enjoyed picking on a trend. Basically, an example being there's a very popular YouTube channel called My Story Animated. Huge viewership. And that's part of a wider genre of so-called real life stories from high school and whatnot. They're not real life. They're all crazy. They're all about, I was a secret billionaire at high school, things like that. And I thought it would be really funny to do an episode that parodied that. Even though Boy and Dragon are not high schoolers, they're not high school age, they don't look like the sort of anime light aesthetics of My Story Animated. But I thought, what if they just wander into a high school cartoon? What if they just wander into a cartoon and cause their unique brand of chaos, all that jazz? And yeah, that's how we do it. We just have them wander into other cartoons.
I think I saw one episode that did really, really well where I think you parodied low quality kids content.
Yeah, that was fun. We did a parody of very bad CGI. There's a lot of bad CGI color videos on YouTube that are so bizarre because they're made so cheaply and quickly that they almost take on this surrealistic, dreamlike vibe. So I'm thinking of stuff where there's videos on YouTube where there's a fountain that's spraying red water and then a chicken walks through the fountain, and then when it emerges, it's not only a different animal like a cow, but it's now bright red. And then the fountain changes color again and the sequence repeats. It's got such a absurd vibe. So yeah, we had an episode of Boy and Dragon wandered into one of those types of cartoons.
It sounds like to you, it was really important that Boy and Dragon had a creator-led voice.
I think audiences are starving for that. And I think a lot of the biggest YouTubers provide that. A lot of audiences watch YouTube, their favorite YouTuber, and are like, oh yeah, I'm speaking of like people like iShowSpeed. And they think, oh yeah, I know this guy. Like this guy is talking to me. It's a very intimate relationship. They often watch on the phone in very intimate spaces, like in their bedroom and whatnot. And I think that's a very different way to watch content than what older audiences are used to, where it's kind of just in the living room. So I think when something's creator-led, it adds that layer of intimacy audiences really go for. And as a creator, I want that layer of intimacy too. I want people to know that I'm expressing myself to them or trying to communicate something about my life, that my experiences to them, even if it is through the medium of a dragon farting.
David, you were both the showrunner and a channel strategist. Is that unusual? What was that like wearing both hats on Boy and Dragon?
In the world of YouTube, the creator economy, that's not unusual at all. A lot of the times, even the biggest creators who may now have their own channel strategists, they probably were at one point their channel strategist. And it's important because the worlds of creative and distribution are a lot more closely linked on YouTube. You know, the traditional paradigm is you make it and then it all just gets sent off to someone else to distribute it. But with YouTube, it really requires, the distributor really needs to know about the show and who the intended audience is. And in order to do that, why not involve the creative? I knew what episodes were coming up, which had certain themes I wanted to communicate via the thumbnail. So because I knew that information, I could help manage the channel better.
I see. And can you describe what your development process was like? What does ideation look like? What does scripting look like?
Yeah. So scripting is a story outline followed by a script with two drafts of a script. Very small writing team. The most recent season I was basically the only writer, along with help from some very good creative producers. And mostly what I do is I look and see what episodes have performed well in the past, what events are coming up, whether it be a holiday or a sort of important movie release or a video game release or something that's compatible with the Boy and Dragon house style of comedy. And then I think about their relationship, um, which is the core of the show. Like, how can we do an interesting story exploring their relationship and maybe a facet we haven't explored before? So all that gets piled together, and much like making a stew, they become the ingredients for hopefully a funny script of Boy and Dragon.
And you talked about the alignment with the house style of comedy. Can you tell me what it was like getting clarity on that house style of comedy?
I think a lot of that just comes from myself and my influences. I suppose, I was raised on The Simpsons and whatnot, but I'm also myself, I'm a little bit of sometimes to a fault, I'm very concerned with, oh, this joke's been done before, this feels cliche, this feels tired. Um, and sometimes that actually points me in the wrong direction, and I end up doing stuff that I consider to be perhaps a little bit too absurdist. But I do try to make sure that things feel fresh. I don't consider myself as writing for just a kid's audience. I consider myself as writing for a general audience.
Hmm.
And I also feel something I used to love about The Simpsons when I was a kid is I wouldn't get jokes, but I would be aware I wasn't getting them because I wasn't old enough. And there was kind of, I don't know, there was a kind of satisfaction. It made me feel, oh, this is a smart show. I'm a smart kid for watching this smart show because I didn't get that joke about, Homer's knowledge of the Supreme Court justices.
Okay. Boy and Dragon has billions and billions of views. What are the success metrics in YouTube, and how do they compare with, say, TV? When did that reality click for you?
I guess you're talking about ratings, like eyeballs, whereas on television, like a few 100,000 is considered a very real success, whereas on YouTube, it would be something like a very real success would be considered at least 1 million plus. Nowadays, it would be considered even higher, like 5 million, 10 million. Honestly, that clicked with me before the channel started. I'd been researching other popular channels, and I was blown away by the views they were getting. And a lot of those popular channels I thought were perhaps not very good, or at least not to my tastes. But at the same time, that's what people were watching. And it's difficult to sort of switch off that voice in your head saying, this is garbage, when actually there's 10 million people telling you it's what they prefer over, something that cost a studio $10 million to make. They'd much rather watch someone do a fake obstacle course in their yard than a $45 million animated feature film.
Do you think there's an element of snobbery to it that blocks us from seeing the reality?
I don't know. I think everyone talks about how atomized audiences are, and they are. But I think, again, it's that intimacy and that sense of homemadeness that I think audiences respond to. Also, let's be aware that the media diet isn't just YouTube. Like, people can go watch a film if they want as well. It's another meal in the media diet now that wasn't there previously.
Yeah. I'll go bore myself watching all 3 hours of The Irishman and then cleanse my palate by watching Boy and Dragon.
Well, I think I'd much rather watch a 9-hour analysis of The Irishman, by a YouTuber.
That's very true. You've compared YouTube retention to TV ad breaks. Can you describe what that means and maybe suggest a framework for us to better understand retention?
Yeah, retention. So everything has always been written for retention. Television shows in the past in America were free act shows because there were free commercial breaks. You brought people in, you went your first commercial break, you hoped they'd stay. You'd then get into Act 1, and you would end Act 1 with a, oh, shit moment. And the reason you did that was to keep people watching through the commercials. That's a retention strategy. So retention strategies have always existed. They operate a little bit differently on YouTube because it's more brutal. On YouTube, you are constantly surrounded by, you are one click away from another video. So if that video is not engaging you, not giving you what you want, you can just click off really easily. Whereas in television in the past, just as an example, maybe you could click away, but you'd probably find another channel with commercials on at the same time. So I think people do obsess over retention, and it can lead to some really weird decisions in the creative, such as honestly, I've been on calls with retention experts who say, "Oh, the audience really responded to this noise, so use that noise more." It's like, well, I'm not going to do a show where it's just that same noise every second. But yeah, I think with YouTube, I think something that's important. Sorry, this is becoming a bit tangential, but I think one thing to know about Generation Alpha, Generation Z, is they've grown up saturated in storytelling, like far more than millennials or Gen X or above have. They've had millions of stories at their fingertips, just on their phone, whenever they want them, 24/7. So they're unconsciously very, very aware of the tropes, the structures. They're aware of Act 1s, Act 2s. And I think that younger generation, they just want you to get into the story faster. Like, I know most of the series that I grew up watching, when the episodes would start, like The Simpsons or what, they'd have an icebreaker scene just to set the tone, just to get you settled in. And sometimes The Simpsons would dedicate an entire Act 1 to kind of an unrelated icebreaker. I think these days people are like, just get into the story. Just, we know what this show is. We just want you to get to the meat of it, which, is what it is.
As a creator, I've seen the retention graphs fall off a cliff after 3 seconds, which is just, it's humbling, to say the least, when that happens.
I mean, they all do, because a lot of your viewers have clicked on the video by accident.
Yep.
But it's about can you then stabilize? Can you stabilize that graph? That's the key. That's why a lot of YouTube shows have just like a cut every 1 second. It's just to try and just keep people's attention. And look, there's something to it, but I think it gives it a kind of junk food vibe, if not used judiciously.
Can you describe what it was like working with animators on a schedule and script that is iterative? Did any collaborators experience a cultural shock, and how did they navigate through that?
Well, the scripts weren't iterative. They were locked at a certain point, and then that was it. There was no issues with animators. It wasn't a big culture shock. I think there would have been a big culture shock had there been lots of production executives on the show, or people who are used to doing things in a more traditional sense. I think they would have been a bit surprised by the loose story Bible. I remember being asked this question, how does technology work in this show? Because he's a medieval knight and a dragon. My attitude was, that they just have technology. They were like, well, why do they just have technology? Go into the details as to how this works. Is this some kind of world where it's in the future, but everyone just dresses medievally? No, it's just because they just have it, because it's a cartoon. which I think these days there's definitely some people would find that very unsatisfactory as an answer, but I think for the tone of the show we were making, that's totally fine.
So, David, what do you think made Boy and Dragon such a compelling IP?
I think what makes it compelling, there's no one thing that makes it compelling. We did have things like jokes about needing the bathroom, and we had characters getting angry. In kids' television these days, I've worked on a lot of kids' shows, some for television, and it is surprising how hesitant producers are to show kids getting angry or to reference, bodily functions that everyone has. I should say Boy and Dragon it's definitely not a poop and fart show. If you watch the series, there's maybe 2 of those types of jokes across the 69 episodes. But these are like getting angry, needing the bathroom. These are topics that are real, that kids go through. It's very difficult to find in modern kids media. I don't know why that happened. I think maybe broadcasters are nervous about it, or maybe parents complained about it.
How has the YouTube landscape evolved since 2019 when you started the show?
Well, a lot. So in 2019, there was no made for kids / non-made for kids split, which there is now. YouTube used to treat all content, whether it's for kids or adults, the same. There was comments sections, and there was personalized ads based on watch behavior. And then the Online Kids Safety Act came into force, which I'm pro. I'm pro kids being safe online. So YouTube got split into 2, non-made for kids and made for kids. made for kids. You can't comment on videos. You can't do much more than like and subscribe. And also the advertisements that you get served on made for kids videos are non-personalized ads, which means that advertisers are less interested in that because they want to highly target their ads, which means there's now less money than there was before to make on kids content on YouTube, which has been a struggle. However, there's also been the introduction of shorts, the shorts feed, which is a very good way for getting your show out there if it's compatible with the kind of shorts feed audience. And also YouTube has blown up and is kind of the big dog. I believe I saw somewhere it is actually the number one streamer in the world. It does beat Netflix in those metrics. And it has almost became, in addition to something that people will watch on their phone very intimately, it has become something that is on in the living room now. It is something that a parent will put on for their child. They will go to YouTube to find kids stuff. So it's bigger than it's ever been.
What do you think the impact is or the opportunity might be for creators who want to create kids' content?
I think the opportunity is that's where the audience is. The opportunity is audience build. There's then I hate this term, it's so businessy. There's then the flywheel of a spin-off merchandise and other ways to monetize you can do after that. But if you want to find that kid audience, the kid audience are on YouTube. They are not on broadcast television. And it seems that they're less frequently on streamers as well.
A lot of creatives are still thinking in a TV mindset. What does that mindset get wrong about platforms like YouTube?
Well, I love creators and I want them to express themselves as authentically as possible. I do think that a lot of the time, I know I certainly still think like this at times, is, you want to recreate what you grew up with. So you want to recreate those kind of neat free act structure stories, 20-minute shows that you saw when you were growing up, and you want to do similar jokes. And a lot of stuff I see by creators is they've kind of created a Saturday morning cartoon from like 15 years ago, which it might be a great Saturday morning cartoon for 15 years ago. But again, they need to realize that Gen Alpha, these kids' audience, they haven't grown up with that. You might need to look a little bit closer to where they are at in their lives, where we are at culturally, all that kind of good sociological stuff.
And what do you think are the levers that these creators can pull to test their ideas to see whether or not it does align?
This is easier said than done, but of course, it is free to upload on YouTube. It's one thing to obviously making animation is an incredible Herculean task, so it's never easy. But, I've seen a lot of people find success starting with shorts, little 10, 20-second animations. That can be a good way to get signals back from the audience about what they enjoy. So yeah, I guess it starts small and iterate would be my advice. Don't start with your massive 52 episode and 1,000-page story Bible. Yeah, start small and then go from there.
What would you have done differently if you had to start Boy and Dragon today?
Whenever you start something for the first time, it is a process of learning, and I feel I know a lot more now than when I started. So if I could take all that knowledge I had now and apply it to when I started, that would have been great. At the same time, it was required learning. Like I had to go through that in order to learn it. I had to go through the frustration of why isn't this thumbnail working? Why isn't this title working? How do I read this data?
If you have a key takeaway, especially for other creators of kids' content, what would you like people to leave with after hearing this conversation?
I guess I'd like people to leave thinking that kids' content isn't dead. Like there's still a world where there can be new IP that connects to children and also is a viable product for your business. I guess it's just about, some of the older ways are falling away and the newer ways are arriving, and it's about just riding that wave. And as I said, definitely changing your mindset a bit. Think about where the audience is. Think about meeting the audience where they are now, not where they were a few years ago.
It's not like there are less kids in the world, yet the numbers for kids programming on free-to-air television and streaming are dropping. It just means that the kids are looking elsewhere, so you have to follow them.
I do think there's something to be said for that audiences are very atomized now. But, you look at Bluey, that's a big smash hit. It can still be done. I think the other Probably the other takeaway I'd like people to have is that I know that I've, for many years, lived in this world where it's like, well, we need ROI within 6 months, 12 months. And generally, kids' brands, including Bluey, do take a while to build momentum and get that big success. There was a good 3 seasons plus of Bluey before it became that mega hit. And I think there was 5 seasons of Peppa Pig before it became a big deal. I know Peppa Pig was around for years when I was younger, just as a regular show with no merchandise, no sort of massive global following. And then that very slowly built steam. This is the story of history. There's so many big successful shows that weren't necessarily the biggest hits in their first season. Because the commissioner or whoever believed in them, they'd keep them on the air for another year or two, and then suddenly they would pop.
To close, we ask all of our guests one signature question, David. What is your big idea to reimagine the screen industry?
Let's get rid of all the screens and let's go back to a kind of agrarian society where we just farm and we just get all storytelling apart from the oral tradition should be banished.
That's perfect.
Okay, great. Yeah. Especially podcasts. We need to get rid of all podcasts. No, I'm kidding. It's such a big question. I think there's an opportunity now more than ever to start small then iterate. Start small then iterate, rather than feel that you have to pour millions and millions into this story Bible, this animatic, and get everything absolutely pristine to some vague specification that a production committee has in their head. Maybe let's think about the audience instead.
David Hutchinson, thank you for being on the program.
Oh, thank you very much. Nice to be here.
We Interrupt This Broadcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the
Gadigal people of the Eora Nation,
The Turrbal and Yagara people,
the Yugambeh language people and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and first storytellers of these regions.
Always was, always will be.